I died shivering in a flooded basement, coughing up blood, while my sister, wearing my stolen diamond tiara, smiled on national television. She hadn't just stolen my inheritance. My own mother had happily handed it to her. But fate is a funny thing. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't a broken 25-year-old anymore. I was 7 again, staring at the exact same gold locket that ruined my life. This time, I didn't fight for my rightful place. I stepped back, smiled, and let my sister walk right into a beautiful, gilded trap. The first thing I registered was the smell. It wasn't the metallic tang of my own blood, or the foul stench of the flooded basement where I had drawn my last agonizing breath. It was the sharp, synthetic sweetness of cheap maple syrup and the heavy scent of stale cigarette smoke. I gasped, my small lungs expanding violently as my eyes snapped open. I was staring at a water-stained ceiling, adorned with peeling floral wallpaper. The rhythmic, rattling hum of a broken box fan vibrated against my skull. I bolted upright, my tiny hands gripping the frayed edges of a scratchy wool blanket. I looked down at my hands. They were small, unscarred, and trembling. I touched my face, feeling the soft, round cheeks of a child. I was alive. I was 7 years old. The memories of my past life crashed into me like a freight train. At 25, I had died a miserable, forgotten death. I was the true heir to the Kensington fortune, a massive, multi-billion-dollar empire left behind by my biological father, Richard Kensington, before he died in a plane crash. But I never saw a dime of it. When the Kensington lawyers came looking for me, my older sister, Chloe, realized what was at stake. With the help of our mother, Evelyn, Chloe stole my silver locket, memorized my father's French lullaby, and claimed my identity. When I tried to fight back, to prove who I was, Evelyn locked me in a closet. She told the lawyers I was a pathological liar, a deeply disturbed child, prone to violent fantasies. They believed her. Chloe was swept away to a life of unimaginable luxury in Manhattan, and I was dumped into the foster care system the moment they left, treated like an unwanted burden. Years later, when I finally gathered the evidence to expose them, Chloe's security team cornered me. Evelyn had watched with cold, dead eyes as they pushed me down a flight of concrete stairs into a flooded basement, leaving me to drown in the dark. "Abigail, get your lazy self out of bed." Evelyn's screech shattered the memory. I flinched, muscle memory kicking in. But as I looked toward the bedroom door, the fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline fury. Evelyn stood in the doorway, a cigarette dangling from her bright red lips. She wore a faded pink bathrobe, her eyes narrowed in perpetual irritation. Behind her, peeking around her waist, was Chloe. She was 8 years old, with perfect blonde ringlets that Evelyn spent hours curling every morning, while my own dark hair was left in a matted bird's nest. "Don't just sit there staring at me like an idiot," Evelyn snapped. "Your sister wants to watch cartoons." Move to the floor. In my past life, I would have cried. I would have begged for a hug, desperate for a scrap of the affection she lavished on Chloe. Today, I simply slid off the mattress and walked out of the room without a word. The lawyers were coming today. I remembered the date with chilling clarity. October 14th. At exactly 2 p.m., a sleek black town car would pull up to our miserable Chicago apartment complex. They would knock on the door, looking for Richard Kensington's lost daughter. I walked into the cramped, greasy kitchen and crawled under the wobbly Formica table. There, hidden behind a loose baseboard, was the silver locket. It was the only thing I had left of the man who had loved me for the first 3 years of my life before he died. It was heavy, inscribed with the Kensington crest. I pulled it out. The metal was cold against my palm. In my previous life, I had run to the lawyers with this locket, crying tears of joy, thinking I was finally going to be saved. I didn't realize that claiming my birthright was a death sentence. Arthur Kensington, my paternal grandfather, didn't want a granddaughter to love. He wanted an heir to mold into a ruthless corporate weapon. He was a tyrannical, cruel man who subjected his wards to grueling, near-lethal, psychological, and academic trials. Even with my natural genius, surviving Arthur's expectations had been an impossible nightmare. For someone as lazy, entitled, and utterly dim-witted as Chloe, it would be hell on earth. A slow, dark smile spread across my 7-year-old face. Why fight for a poisoned crown? I slipped the locket into my pocket and walked into the living room where Chloe was watching television, chewing loudly on a piece of bubble gum. Evelyn had gone to the bathroom to do her makeup. "Chloe," I whispered, adopting a wide-eyed, innocent expression. She rolled her eyes. "Go away, Abby. You're blocking the screen." "I found something," I said, pulling the silver chain from my pocket, letting the locket dangle in the harsh fluorescent light. Chloe's eyes snapped to the shiny metal. Like a magpie, she was instantly drawn to anything that looked expensive. "Where did you get that? Give it to me." I took a step back, pretending to be protective of it. "It's a secret. A man in a suit is coming today to look for the girl who owns this. If he finds her, he's going to take her to live in a giant castle in New York. She gets to be a billionaire princess." Chloe's jaw dropped. "A princess?" "Yeah," I nodded enthusiastically. "But she has to know a secret song, and she has to have a special mark on her shoulder." I knew Chloe better than she knew herself. Her vanity and greed were a bottomless pit. "I'll give it to you," I said softly. "If you promise not to tell Mom I had it." Chloe snatched the locket from my hands, her eyes gleaming with deceit. "Tell me the song, now." Over the next hour, I patiently taught her the French lullaby. "Mon petit oiseau," my little bird. Her pronunciation was atrocious, but it wouldn't matter. I also took a permanent brown marker from Evelyn's craft drawer and drew a small, crescent-shaped mark on Chloe's left shoulder blade, identical to the birthmark I naturally possessed. To cover my own tracks, I went into the bathroom, grabbed a hot curling iron, and deliberately pressed it against my own birthmark, gritting my teeth as the skin blistered and burned. I wrapped it in a thick gauze bandage. The stage was set. At 1:55 p.m., the sound of a heavy, expensive engine rumbling outside made Evelyn peer through the blinds. "What in the world?" she muttered, dropping her cigarette into a half-empty mug of coffee. At exactly 2:00 p.m., 3 sharp, authoritative knocks echoed through the apartment. I retreated to the darkest corner of the hallway, pulling my knees to my chest, and waited for the show to begin. Evelyn smoothed down her tacky velvet tracksuit and yanked the door open. Standing in the threshold was Mr. Caldwell, the lead attorney for the Kensington estate. He was a tall, imposing man, in a bespoke charcoal suit, flanked by a stern-looking woman holding a leather briefcase. They looked completely out of place in our dilapidated hallway, like hawks forced into a pigeon coop. "Evelyn Miller?" Mr. Caldwell asked, his voice like grinding stones. "Who's asking?" Evelyn replied defensively, though her eyes darted to the expensive Rolex on his wrist. "My name is Jonathan Caldwell. I represent the estate of the late Richard Kensington. May we come in?" Evelyn's face paled, then flushed with a chaotic mix of fear and sudden, blinding greed. She stepped aside, hastily kicking a pile of dirty laundry out of the way. Caldwell didn't bother to sit on our stained sofa. He stood in the center of the room, radiating authority. "I will get straight to the point, Ms. Miller. Before his tragic passing, Mr. Kensington fathered a child, a daughter. Our investigators have traced his movements to this city, and specifically to you." Evelyn's hands started to shake. "Richard left money for his daughter. He left an empire," Caldwell corrected coldly. "But the child's identity must be verified beyond a shadow of a doubt. Does the girl reside here?" Evelyn hesitated. She looked toward the hallway, where I was hiding, and then toward the kitchen, where Chloe was standing. I could see the gears turning in my mother's head. She knew Richard was my father. She knew the timeline. But before she could speak, Chloe, fully primed by my earlier manipulation, stepped forward into the light. "Are you looking for me?" Chloe asked, batting her eyelashes in a way Evelyn had taught her to do when she wanted free candy at the grocery store. Mr. Caldwell looked down at the 8-year-old girl. His expression remained unreadable. "What is your name, child?" "Chloe," she lied smoothly. Then, right on cue, she reached into the collar of her shirt and pulled out the heavy silver locket. "Are you the man coming to take me to the castle?" Caldwell's breath hitched. Beside him, the woman with the briefcase gasped. Evelyn let out a choked noise of pure shock, staring at the locket she had never seen before. "Where did you get that?" Caldwell demanded, dropping to one knee to examine the crest. "My daddy gave it to me before he went away," Chloe recited perfectly, echoing the exact phrasing I had drilled into her an hour ago. "He used to sing to me, too." "Sing to you?" Caldwell's voice trembled slightly. It was the only crack in his armor. "Do you remember the song?" Chloe took a deep breath and butchered the beautiful French melody. "Mon petit aussi, oh," she squeaked, forgetting half the words and humming the rest. But it was enough. Caldwell closed his eyes, clearly moved by the memory of his late employer. "It's her, the lullaby. It's exactly what Richard requested." He stood up, turning to his associate. "Ms. Higgins, check the physical marker." Ms. Higgins approached Chloe. "Sweetheart, could you turn around and pull your collar down slightly?" Chloe happily obliged. There, stark against her pale skin, was the crescent-shaped mark I had drawn. Ms. Higgins nodded sharply at Caldwell. "It matches the medical records Richard left behind." Evelyn was practically vibrating with excitement. "So, she's the one? My Chloe is a billionaire? She is the sole heir to the Kensington Trust," Caldwell confirmed, his tone instantly becoming strictly business. "However, the terms of the trust are absolute. The child must be relocated immediately to the Kensington estate in New York to begin her education under the direct supervision of her grandfather, Arthur Kensington. She will want for nothing, and you, Miss Miller, will receive a monthly stipend of $50,000 for your cooperation, provided you sign full custody over to the estate." Evelyn nearly choked on her own spit. $50,000 a month? Yes, but you must understand. She belongs to the Kensingtons now. You will have limited visitation. "Where do I sign?" Evelyn blurted out, not even looking at Chloe. It was pathetic, really, but my heart soared. Ms. Higgins pulled out a stack of documents. As Evelyn frantically scribbled her name, selling off the child she thought was her golden ticket, Mr. Caldwell's eyes scanned the room and landed on me in the shadows. "And who is this?" he asked, pointing a polished finger in my direction. Evelyn didn't even look up from the paperwork. That's Abigail, my other one. Different dad. Will she be requiring provisions? Caldwell asked. No, Evelyn said quickly, terrified that complicating the deal might cost her the money. I'm putting her in the system. I can't take care of her if I'm going to be traveling and living my new life. The state can have her, just like that. In less than 5 minutes, my mother had thrown me away to secure her own wealth. In my past life, this was the moment that broke my heart into a million irreparable pieces. I had screamed, begged, and clung to her legs until Caldwell's security guards pulled me off. This time, I slowly stepped out of the shadows. I looked at Evelyn, who refused to meet my eyes, and then at Chloe, who was already twirling her hair, looking incredibly smug. Bye, Mom, I said quietly, my voice utterly devoid of emotion. Bye, Chloe. Have a good time in New York. Caldwell gave me a strange, calculating look, perhaps unsettled by how calm a 7-year-old was at being abandoned. But he had what he came for. Within 20 minutes, they were gone. I watched from the dirty apartment window as Chloe climbed into the back of a gleaming Rolls-Royce, clutching my locket, entirely oblivious to the fact that she was stepping into a gilded cage. Arthur Kensington wouldn't care about her blonde curls or her whiny demands. He would demand fluencies in Latin and Mandarin by age 10. He would expect her to comprehend advanced macroeconomics by 12. When she failed, and she would fail spectacularly, his punishments would be psychological warfare. Enjoy the castle, Chloe, I thought, letting out a dark chuckle. I hope you survive the dragons. The transition into the foster care system was brutal, but for me, it was a necessary chrysalis. Because I wasn't kicking, screaming, or traumatized like the other children. I was labeled well-adjusted, but quiet. My caseworker, a tired but kind woman named Brenda, took an immediate liking to me. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't want to languish in group homes. I needed a launch pad. I spent my days in the crowded orphanage library, intentionally leaving advanced calculus and physics books open on tables where the staff would see them. I completed a standardized state aptitude test and deliberately scored in the top 0.01 percentile. By the time I was 9, I had orchestrated my own adoption. Dr. Thomas Wright and his wife, Sarah, were everything Evelyn was not. Thomas was a prominent astrophysics researcher at the University of Chicago, and Sarah was a senior software engineer. They were wealthy, deeply intelligent, and completely unable to have children of their own. When Brenda introduced them to the quiet prodigy who had been abandoned by her mother, they took me in with a tentative, respectful love that I had never experienced in either of my lives. With the Wrights, my true potential was unlocked. They didn't push me for their own glory. They nurtured me out of genuine fascination and care. By the time I was 12, I was publishing peer-reviewed papers in applied mathematics under a pseudonym, A.R. Kens. By 14, I was quietly investing the allowance Thomas and Sarah gave me, turning a few $1,000s into a multi-million-dollar portfolio through algorithmic day trading models I designed myself. I was happy. I was safe. But I never took my eyes off New York. Every evening, from the safety of my high-end computer rig in my spacious bedroom, I tracked the Kensingtons. For the first few years, Evelyn and Chloe were plastered all over the tabloids. The lost Kensington heiress, from rags to riches. Chloe was photographed in custom Dior, attending elite junior galas. Evelyn was often seen in the background, dripping in diamonds, living off her massive monthly stipend and whatever extra cash she could squeeze out of the estate. But by the time Chloe turned 13, The narrative began to shift. The photos of Chloe showed a girl who looked perpetually terrified. Dark circles formed under her eyes. The Kensington PR machine was working overtime to cover up her academic failures, but society whispers were brutal. I hacked into the servers of the elite St. Jude's Preparatory Academy, where Chloe was enrolled. Her transcripts were a bloodbath. She was failing every single subject. Arthur Kensington, the iron-fisted patriarch, was losing his patience. The rumors on Wall Street suggested that Arthur was beginning to doubt Chloe's bloodline, not because of DNA, which Evelyn had somehow managed to fake with forged records early on, but because Chloe was so fundamentally, aggressively stupid. The Kensington intellect is genetic. Arthur had once been quoted in Forbes. It does not skip a generation. Evelyn was in deep trouble. I found records of massive wire transfers from Evelyn's private accounts to various high-end tutoring agencies, academic ghostwriters, and fixers. She was bleeding her monthly stipend dry, trying to keep Chloe afloat. If Arthur found out Chloe was a fraud, he wouldn't just cut them off, he would destroy them. In the Kensington family, fraud was a crime, punishable by total annihilation. The climax of their panic began 3 weeks before Chloe's 15th birthday. Arthur announced a grand showcase. It was a Kensington tradition. To prove she was ready to step up as the primary shareholder of the trust, Chloe was expected to host a massive gala for the global elite. But it wasn't just a party. Arthur had publicly mandated that Chloe perform a notoriously difficult 20-minute violin sonata by Paganini, followed by a live, unscripted presentation on the future of predictive AI in global financial markets. When I read the announcement in the Wall Street Journal, I actually laughed out loud in my bedroom. Chloe couldn't even play Hot Cross Buns on a recorder, and she thought AI was a brand of sneakers. The trap I had set 7 years ago was finally snapping shut. A week later, the first signs of Evelyn's sheer desperation appeared. My security algorithms flagged a ping on my old identity. Someone was searching for Abigail Miller. Evelyn had hired a private investigator. It made perfect sense. Evelyn knew she was cornered. She knew Chloe was going to humiliate the Kensington name in front of the entire world, leading to their immediate exile, or worse. And in her panic, Evelyn remembered the other daughter, the one she threw away like trash, the one who used to read encyclopedias for fun at age 6. She wasn't looking for me because she missed me. She was looking for a ghostwriter. She was looking for a savior to do the work behind the scenes and feed Chloe the answers through an earpiece, just like I had fed her the French lullaby when we were children. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, watching the investigator's digital footprint desperately hit dead ends. Thanks to Thomas and Sarah, my records were sealed under a closed adoption. Legally, Abigail Miller didn't exist anymore, but I didn't want to hide forever. I wanted front-row seats to the carnage. Smiling, I opened a heavily encrypted email server, created a temporary, untraceable address, and sent a single, anonymous message to Evelyn's private investigator. I know where Abigail is. She'll meet you in New York. Bring the mother. It was time to go back to the castle, not as the missing heir, but as the executioner. I chose the Plaza Hotel for our reunion. If I was going to watch my mother grovel, I wanted her to do it in an environment that made her feel painfully small. When Evelyn walked into the Palm Court, she looked like a woman who had been walking a tightrope over a volcano for 8 years. She was draped in a ridiculously flashy Chanel tweed suit, her wrists heavy with Cartier bangles, but no amount of designer fabric could hide the frantic, hollowed-out look in her eyes. Her Botox was stiff, her smile brittle as she scanned the room. I was sitting in a velvet corner booth, sipping Earl Grey tea. At 15, I looked nothing like the ragged, neglected 7-year-old she had tossed to the state of Illinois. Thanks to Thomas and Sarah Wright, I was impeccably educated, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blazer and minimalist pearls, and carried an aura of absolute, unshakable calm. When the private investigator gestured toward my table, Evelyn's eyes widened in disbelief. She stumbled slightly on her Jimmy Choos as she approached. "Abigail," she breathed, her voice trembling. She slid into the booth opposite me, staring as if I were an apparition. "Look at you. You look expensive." "Hello, Mother," I said, letting the word hang in the air like a localized freeze. "I understand you've been looking for me." Evelyn swallowed hard, trying to summon the old, domineering authority she used to wield over me in that miserable Chicago apartment. "Yes. Well, it's about time we reconnected. You're family, Abby, and right now, family needs help." I took a slow sip of my tea. "Is that so? The last time we spoke, you traded me for $50,000 a month in a town car. I assumed your new family was sufficient." She flinched, a flash of ugly resentment crossing her face before she forced it down into a pathetic, pleading mask. "You don't understand the pressure, Abigail. Arthur Kensington is a monster. He expects Chloe to be a genius. He has these insane standards. If she doesn't pull off this showcase next week, he's going to investigate her early academic records. He's threatening to cut her off, to throw us out on the street. And how is that my problem?" I asked smoothly. "Because she's your sister," Evelyn hissed, leaning in, her perfume a suffocating cloud of Tom Ford and desperation. "Listen, the PI said you're some kind of child prodigy now. Skipped grades, doing advanced tech stuff. I need you to write her presentation on that AI garbage Arthur wants. And I need you to feed it to her through an earpiece during the gala." I raised an eyebrow. "And the violin sonata? Even I can't play a Paganini piece through a Bluetooth earpiece." Evelyn looked around nervously before dropping her voice to a whisper. "I paid a sound engineer $200,000 to rig the acoustics in the ballroom. Chloe is going to mime the performance on a muted violin. A flawless, pre-recorded track will play through the concealed surround sound system, perfectly timed to her movements. She's been practicing the bowing for months. But the Q&A session, the unscripted presentation, if she opens her mouth without someone telling her exactly what to say, Arthur will know she's a fraud in 5 seconds." I leaned back, steepled my fingers, and let the silence stretch until Evelyn looked like she was going to have a panic attack right into her scones. "I'll pay you," she said frantically. $1 million. I've skimmed it off the top over the years. Cash. Untraceable. Just save your sister. $1 million. It was pocket change compared to the portfolio I had built. But she didn't need to know that. "I don't want your stolen money, Evelyn," I said softly. "I'll do it for one thing only. Total access." "Access to what?" "The Kensington estate. The gala. I want to be in the control room. I want full administrative clearance to the teleprompter, the audio feed, and Chloe's earpiece. You tell Arthur's security that I'm your newly hired technical director for the event. No background checks, no questions." Evelyn looked hesitant, her natural paranoia kicking in. "Why do you want that?" "Because," I smiled, a cold, empty expression that made her shiver. "If I'm going to orchestrate a masterpiece, I want to make sure my canvas is perfect. Do we have a deal, Mother?" She stared at me for a long moment, realizing she had absolutely no other choice. She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You're a good girl, Abby. I always knew you were the smart one." "Oh, Evelyn." I pulled my hand away, wiping my fingers on a linen napkin. "You have no idea." The Kensington penthouse in Manhattan was less of a home and more of a museum dedicated to wealth and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park. The floors were polished Italian marble, and original Rothko paintings hung on the walls. When I arrived 3 days before the gala, carrying a sleek silver briefcase, the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Chloe was in the grand parlor, throwing a magnificent, shrieking tantrum. She was 15 now, striking in that manufactured, heavily curated way that millions of dollars can buy, but her face was twisted into an ugly sneer. She hurled a sheet of sheet music at a terrified maid. "I can't do the vibrato. My arm hurts. Tell Grandpa my wrist is sprained," she screamed. Evelyn rushed in, waving her hands frantically. "Chloe, hush. Arthur is in the study. He'll hear you." She turned and saw me standing in the doorway. Relief washed over her face. "Abigail is here. She's going to fix it." Chloe stopped screaming and turned to look at me. For a moment, confusion clouded her heavily made-up eyes, followed swiftly by recognition, and then disdain. "Abby?" Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms. "Wow, you still look like a nerd. You're supposed to be my savior? You're going to write my speech." "I'm going to make sure everyone remembers your name, Chloe," I replied evenly, setting my briefcase on the mahogany table and flipping it open to reveal my laptop and audio transmitters. Chloe sneered, walking over and poking at my keyboard. "Whatever, just make sure the words are small. I'm not memorizing anything, so you better speak clearly into that microphone. If you make me look stupid, I'll have Grandpa's security throw you out a window." "You do a fine job of looking stupid, all on your own," I thought, but I simply offered a polite nod. "Let's test the earpiece." Over the next 48 hours, I embedded myself deeply into the Kensington estate's technological infrastructure. Evelyn's hired sound engineer, a nervous guy named Gregory, had indeed set up a brilliant system. The ballroom in the Waldorf Astoria had been rigged with a localized acoustic network. When Chloe touched the bow to the strings of her $2.5 million Stradivarius, which had been secretly fitted with a dampening bridge, so it produced no actual sound, the hidden speakers would project a flawless recording of Paganini's Caprice No. 24. It was a brilliant cheat. But Gregory had made a fatal error. He connected the audio playback system to the same central server as the teleprompter and the earpiece frequency. Late at night, while Chloe slept in her silk sheets and Evelyn self-medicated with gin, I sat in the dark server room, my fingers flying across my keyboard. I didn't just want them to fail. Failure was too easy. Chloe failing would just confirm Arthur's suspicions. No, I needed it to be a catastrophe of epic proportions. I needed it to be a public, undeniable exposure of their fraud. Something so spectacular that the Kensington Board of Directors would have to sever them entirely to save the company's stock price. First, I went to work on the AI presentation. I wrote a dazzling, genius-level script for the first 3 minutes, enough to make Arthur Kensington puff his chest out with pride. But for the Q&A section, I set up a secondary audio channel in Chloe's earpiece. Next came the violin track. I located the pristine, flawless audio file Gregory had uploaded. I didn't delete it. Deleting it would just result in silence, and Chloe could fake a sudden illness. Instead, I spliced the file. I kept the first 30 seconds perfect, but exactly at the 31st second, where the sonata reaches its most complex, blisteringly fast crescendo, I replaced the audio with something else entirely. I replaced it with the raw, unedited audio of Chloe's practice sessions that I had secretly recorded on my phone earlier that day. The sound of a screeching, off-key, cat-strangling nightmare, complete with Chloe screaming, "I hate this stupid thing," in the middle of it. I encrypted the modified file with a localized override command tied directly to my personal smartwatch. Once the sequence started, no one in the control booth, not Gregory, not Evelyn, could stop it. On the morning of the gala, Evelyn came into the tech suite, her eyes bloodshot. She handed me a black earpiece. "Is it ready?" she asked, her voice cracking. "Perfectly," I said, sliding the earpiece into a velvet box for Chloe. "She's going to give a performance they will never forget." Evelyn let out a breath she had been holding for years. She actually hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that made my skin crawl. "When this is over, I'll make sure you're taken care of, Abby. I promise." "Don't worry about me, Mother," I whispered against her shoulder, my eyes locked on the blinking green light of the server. "I've already secured my inheritance." The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria was a sea of terrifying wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the 300 invited guests. These weren't just rich people. These were the architects of the global economy. I saw the CEO of Morgan Stanley sipping champagne with tech billionaires from Silicon Valley. Senators mingled with European royalty. And sitting at the very front, in a high-backed velvet chair that looked suspiciously like a throne, was Arthur Kensington. Even at 75, the man was a force of nature. He had hawkish features, silver hair slicked back, and eyes as cold and unforgiving as a frozen lake. He wasn't smiling. He was watching the stage with the predatory stillness of a wolf, waiting for a lame deer to stumble. I was positioned in the elevated glass control booth at the back of the ballroom, directly overlooking the stage. Gregory, the sound engineer, was at the console next to me, sweating profusely. "Audio levels are green," Gregory muttered, his hands shaking as he adjusted a dial. "Teleprompter is accued. Backing track is armed." "Excellent work, Gregory," I said smoothly, tapping the face of my smartwatch under my sleeve. Down on the floor, Evelyn was fluttering near the front row, wearing a custom Oscar de la Renta gown that cost more than the apartment I grew up in. She looked up at the booth and gave me a frantic, desperate thumbs up. I ignored her. At exactly 8 p.m., the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd, so complete you could hear the clinking of ice in crystal glasses. Arthur Kensington stood up. He didn't use a microphone. He didn't need to. His voice projected across the room with terrifying authority. "Decades ago, I built the Kensington Empire on a singular principle. Excellence is not an aspiration. It is a baseline." Arthur began, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Wealth is easily inherited. Intellect, however, must be proven. Tonight, my granddaughter, Chloe Kensington, will demonstrate that the blood in her veins is worthy of the legacy she stands to inherit." He sat back down. The subtext was clear to every shark in the room. "Impress me, or you're out." The heavy velvet curtains parted. Chloe stepped into the spotlight. She looked undeniably beautiful in a sweeping emerald gown, holding the antique Stradivarius by her side. But through the zoom lens of the control booth camera, I could see the sheer terror in her eyes. She was rigid, her knuckles white where she gripped the neck of the violin. She walked to the center of the stage, bowed, stiffly, and raised the violin to her chin. She positioned her bow, ready to mime her way to a billion-dollar inheritance. "Cue the track," I told Gregory. Gregory hit the master play button. Through the hidden, state-of-the-art surround sound system, the first notes of Paganini's Caprice, number 24, soared into the room. It was breathtaking. The tone was rich, flawless, and technically perfect. Down in the audience, Evelyn slumped into her chair, pressing a hand to her chest in relief. The senators nodded in appreciation. The tech billionaires looked suitably impressed. Even Arthur Kensington's rigid posture relaxed a fraction of an inch, a tiny, rare smirk touching the corner of his lips. Chloe, gaining confidence, closed her eyes and began to sway, dramatically drawing her bow back and forth across the dampened strings, acting her heart out. She was actually smiling now, believing she had gotten away with the greatest heist in high society history. I looked at the timer on my screen. 27 seconds, 28, 29. "Stand by," I whispered to myself. 30. I tapped the face of my smartwatch. The override command flashed red on my screen, bypassing Gregory's console entirely. Down on the stage, Chloe threw her arm out for the grand, sweeping crescendo. But instead of the soaring masterpiece of Paganini, the massive speakers suddenly blasted a horrifying, screeching wail that sounded like a dying goose being dragged across a chalkboard. The pristine music abruptly vanished, replaced by the raw, unedited audio of Chloe's disastrous practice session. The screeching of the bow, grinding violently against out-of-tune strings, echoed off the crystal chandeliers at maximum volume. The entire ballroom flinched in unison. Chloe froze. Her bow was suspended in midair, but the horrifying screeching continued to blast from the speakers. She stared out at the audience, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. Then, my favorite part of the recording echoed through the ballroom. Chloe's own whiny, petulant voice, amplified to concert-level decibels. "I hate this stupid thing. Why do I have to learn it? Can't we just pay someone to fake it? Grandpa is so annoying." A collective gasp ripped through the audience. In the front row, Evelyn shot to her feet, her face draining of all color, looking like she had just been shot in the chest. At the console next to me, Gregory panicked. "What the hell is that? Cut it! Cut the audio!" He frantically slammed the mute and stop buttons on his board. Nothing happened. The agonizing screech of the practice violin continued to play, mocking the dead silence of the horrified crowd. "It's locked!" Gregory screamed, his hands flying across the keyboard. "The system is locked out. It's running on a localized override." Down on the stage, Chloe dropped the $2.5 million Stradivarius. It hit the floor with a sickening crack, the wood splintering loudly over the edge of the stage. She clamped her hands over her face and burst into hysterical tears. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hands, watching the monitor with a smile that reached all the way to my eyes. Arthur Kensington slowly stood up from his throne. The tiny smirk was gone. His face had transformed into a mask of pure, terrifying, murderous rage. The trap hadn't just snapped shut. It had crushed them completely. But I wasn't done. The presentation was next, and I had a few things left to whisper in my sister's ear. The screech of the ruined violin track was still ringing in the ears of the global elite when Gregory, the sound engineer, finally lost his mind. "Unlock the system!" he screamed, grabbing my shoulder and trying to physically shove me away from the control console. You crazy little brat. Do you know what you've just done? Arthur Kensington is going to have us killed. I didn't even flinch. Without breaking my gaze from the panoramic window overlooking the ballroom, I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out a sleek, heavy titanium pen, and drove the blunt end hard into Gregory's solar plexus. He wheezed, his eyes bulging as the air rushed out of his lungs, and collapsed onto the carpeted floor of the booth, gasping for breath like a landed fish. "Do not interrupt the artist while she is working, Gregory," I murmured, stepping over his trembling legs to reach the reinforced steel door of the control booth. I slid the heavy deadbolt into place, locking us inside. Down in the ballroom, absolute pandemonium was attempting to break loose. The senator from Massachusetts was whispering furiously to his aides. The CEO of a major tech conglomerate was staring at the stage with his jaw unhinged. The splintered remains of the $2.5 million Stradivarius lay at Chloe's feet like the bones of her shattered future. But Arthur Kensington did not tolerate chaos. He raised one single, liver-spotted hand. The gesture was slight, but it carried the weight of a god demanding silence. Instantly, the murmuring died. The heavy, suffocating quiet returned, broken only by Chloe's pathetic, heaving sobs as she stood paralyzed under the blinding spotlight. "Pick up your head, child," Arthur commanded, his voice slicing through the air like a silver blade. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The lethal calmness in his tone was infinitely more terrifying. "You are a Kensington. If you have humiliated this family with a childish prank, you will salvage it now. The presentation on predictive artificial intelligence. Begin. Now." Evelyn, looking completely deranged, scurried to the edge of the stage. Her designer gown was soaked in nervous sweat. "Chloe, the earpiece," she hissed, making frantic tapping motions against her own ear. "Listen to the earpiece. Just say what she tells you." Chloe, hyperventilating, reached up with trembling manicured fingers and pressed the tiny black device deeper into her ear canal. She looked up at the control booth. Even from this distance, I could see the sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. She was a hollow vessel, waiting to be filled. I tapped the microphone on my console. "Take a deep breath, Chloe," I whispered into the mic. My voice was smooth, hypnotic, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Step up to the podium. Smile. Tell them you were just testing their auditory endurance. Be charming." Chloe swallowed hard. She stumbled to the acrylic podium, gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. I, she stammered, staring out at the sea of billionaires. "I was testing your auditory endurance." A little joke. No one laughed. Arthur's face remained a mask of carved granite. "Good," I purred into the microphone. "Now, look at the teleprompter. I'm turning it on." I hit a keystroke. The massive, invisible teleprompter screens, positioned at the back of the room, lit up. But I didn't feed them the AI presentation. I fed them a blank screen. Chloe would have to rely entirely on my voice. "Repeat after me, Chloe, exactly as I say it," I instructed. "Or Grandpa is going to throw you and your mother out onto the street tonight. Do you understand?" Chloe gave a microscopic nod, tears tracking through her heavy foundation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chloe echoed, her voice shaking violently. "To understand the future of predictive artificial intelligence," I said. "To understand the future of predictive artificial intelligence," she parroted, sounding like a malfunctioning robot. "We must first examine the concept of the Trojan horse," I continued. She repeated it. The crowd leaned in. slightly intrigued by the sudden shift in rhetoric. Perhaps the disastrous violin performance really had been a bizarre, avant-garde icebreaker. A system is only as intelligent as the data it is fed. I whispered into the microphone, my fingers dancing across the keyboard to cue up the massive projector screen behind her. If the core data is fraudulent, the entire empire will inevitably collapse. Chloe repeated the words. She was gaining a tiny fraction of confidence, completely oblivious to the noose I was tying around her neck. She thought this was the speech. She thought she was being profound. For example, I instructed, consider the concept of stolen identity. Chloe frowned slightly, but her fear of silence pushed the words out of her mouth. For example, consider the concept of stolen identity. If a parasite infiltrates a host, behind her, the massive 50-foot LED screen suddenly flashed to life, but it didn't show charts on machine learning. It displayed a massive, high-definition photograph of a forged birth certificate. Beside it was a scanned copy of a wire transfer. $250,000 sent from Evelyn Miller's private account to a notorious black market document forger in Chicago, dated 8 years ago. The audience gasped. Chloe, unable to see the screen behind her, thought they were reacting to her brilliance. She stood a little taller. If that parasite, I continued, my voice dropping to a dark, menacing register, steals a silver locket and learns a French lullaby to deceive a billionaire. Chloe opened her mouth to repeat it, and then froze. The words finally registered in her vacant brain. Her jaw snapped shut. She stared out at the audience, her eyes widening in horror, as she saw the senators pointing at the screen behind her. Say it, Chloe, I commanded through the earpiece, or I hit the button that displays the fake DNA test receipts. Oh wait, I just did. The screen shifted. Now, it displayed a detailed email thread between Evelyn and a corrupt geneticist, outlining exactly how they had swapped my hair follicles for Chloe's during the initial verification process. Chloe, what is going on? Evelyn shrieked, abandoning all protocol and trying to climb the steps onto the stage. Turn the screen off. Turn it off. Keep going, Chloe, I whispered. Tell them the truth. Tell them you don't even know what AI stands for. Tell them you failed basic algebra 4 times. Repeat after me. I am a fraud. Chloe burst into hysterical, hyperventilating sobs. She ripped the earpiece out of her ear and threw it onto the podium. It's not my fault, she screamed into the live microphone, her voice echoing like a thunderclap. My mom made me do it. I didn't want to learn the stupid bird song. She told me to take the necklace. The ballroom erupted. It was a symphony of chaos. Billionaires were standing up. Security guards were talking frantically into their wrist mics. Evelyn rushed the podium, tackling Chloe away from the microphone, trying to cover her daughter's mouth with her hands. She's sick. She's having a psychotic break. Evelyn screamed over the roar of the crowd, looking wildly toward Arthur. Arthur, please. She's just having a breakdown. Arthur Kensington did not move. He sat perfectly still, his cold, dead eyes locked onto the glowing 50-foot screen that detailed every single lie Evelyn had spun for the last 8 years. He read the emails. He read the bank transfers. The math of the betrayal was right there, indisputable and absolute. Slowly, Arthur turned his head and looked up at the glass control booth. I was standing right at the window, the harsh glow of the monitors illuminating my face. I didn't hide. I looked down at the man who had terrified generations of corporate titans, and I smiled. I raised a hand and gave him a slow, mocking wave. Arthur's eyes narrowed, a flash of terrifying realization crossing his features. He snapped his fingers. Within seconds, 4 massive men in black suits began sprinting up the grand staircase toward the control room. The heavy steel door of the control booth shuddered as the first impact hit it. They were trying to kick it down. I calmly powered down my encrypted laptop, slid it into my silver briefcase, and locked it. I adjusted the cuffs of my navy blazer, checked my reflection in the dark glass of the monitor, and waited. On the third kick, the deadbolt gave way with a screech of tearing metal. 4 armed Kensington security operatives flooded into the small room. One of them immediately dragged a still wheezing Gregory out of the corner, while 2 others leveled their gazes at me. "Hands where we can see them," the lead guard barked. I picked up my briefcase and stepped forward smoothly. "Take me to him." They didn't handcuff me, likely confused by how utterly compliant and fearless a 15-year-old girl was acting amidst the destruction of a multi-billion-dollar empire. They escorted me out of the booth, down the grand, sweeping staircase, and directly onto the floor of the ballroom. The guests had been corralled to the edges of the room by Arthur's private security. No one was permitted to leave. This wasn't just a scandal, it was an execution, and Arthur Kensington demanded an audience. As I walked down the center aisle, the crowd parted for me. I felt their eyes burning into me. Curiosity, fear, awe. I walked with the immaculate, perfect posture that Thomas and Sarah Wright had taught me. My chin held high. I reached the front of the stage. Evelyn was on her knees, sobbing hysterically, her designer gown ruined, her makeup streaked in ugly black lines down her face. Chloe was curled into a fetal position near the shattered violin, rocking back and forth. And then there was Arthur. He had descended from his throne and was standing in the center of the floor, leaning heavily on a silver-handled cane. "You!" Evelyn screeched, her eyes locking onto me. She scrambled up from the floor, lunging at me with clawed hands. "You little bitch! You set us up! I'll kill you!" Before her manicured claws could reach my face, I sidestepped her clumsy attack with the grace of a matador, grabbed her wrist, and twisted it sharply behind her back. She shrieked in pain and dropped to her knees again. I released her instantly, dusting off my sleeves as if she had contaminated my jacket. "Assaulting a minor in front of 300 witnesses, Evelyn?" I asked coldly. "Add it to the list of charges." Arthur slammed the base of his cane against the marble floor. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot. Evelyn whimpered and stayed down. Arthur slowly walked toward me. He ignored Evelyn. He ignored Chloe. His hawkish eyes were locked entirely on my face. He studied my features, the sharp line of my jaw, the dark hair, the cold, calculating intelligence radiating from my eyes. "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "You read the emails on the screen, Arthur," I said, holding his gaze without a flinch. "I'm the parasite's other daughter, the one she threw into the garbage 8 years ago." Arthur's jaw tightened. "She hired you to run the tech. You orchestrated this entire sabotage. You hacked my servers. You humiliated my house." "Your house was already humiliated," I countered sharply. "I just turned on the lights so you could see the rot." Evelyn crawled forward, grasping at Arthur's trouser leg. "Arthur, please, listen to me. She's a jealous psychopath. Chloe is your granddaughter. The DNA was real. I swear it. She just hacked the screen to make us look bad Because she's jealous of Chloe's life. Arthur looked down at Evelyn with such profound disgust. It looked like he was staring at a crushed cockroach. Then he looked back at me. Is she? Let's settle it then, I said calmly. I walked over to where Chloe was rocking on the floor. Get up, Chloe. She just whimpered. I said, get up, I snapped, my voice cracking like a whip. Chloe scrambled to her feet, terrified of me. Turn around and lower your dress, I commanded. Chloe, crying, turned her back to Arthur and pulled the emerald fabric down, exposing her left shoulder blade. There, stark against her skin, was the crescent-shaped birthmark. You see? Evelyn cried triumphantly from the floor. The Kensington mark. She has it. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small, alcohol-soaked sterilization wipe I had taken from Gregory's tech kit, and grabbed Chloe's shoulder. Ow! Stop! Chloe shrieked as I scrubbed the wipe violently over the mark. I dropped the wipe to the floor. The crescent shape was completely gone, leaving only red, irritated skin, a custom cosmetic tattoo designed to fade and be reapplied every few years, so it looked like it was growing with her, I explained, turning to Arthur. Evelyn had it done a month after you took them in. Before that, it was just a brown Sharpie. Arthur's face drained of color. He staggered back half a step, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked from Chloe's bare shoulder to Evelyn, who was now hyperventilating, realizing her ultimate doom had arrived. And the locket? Arthur whispered, his voice trembling for the first time. The lullaby? I taught her the song an hour before your lawyers arrived, I said. She barely memorized the first verse. She didn't know the second. I took a deep breath, and in the dead silence of the Waldorf Astoria ballroom, I sang the second verse of Mon Petit Oiseau. My French was flawless, the melody haunting and perfect, exactly as my father had sung it to me when I was 3 years old. Arthur closed his eyes. A single tear escaped his iron control, tracing down his wrinkled cheek. He knew, in his bones, in his blood, he knew. The mark, Arthur choked out, opening his eyes to look at me. I didn't hesitate. I unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of my silk blouse and pulled the fabric off my left shoulder. There, scarred into my skin, was the crescent moon. It wasn't smooth or pretty. It was a mass of raised, puckered, burned tissue. I burned it off with a curling iron the day they left, I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I knew your lawyers would look for it. I knew if they found 2 girls with the same mark, they would take me, and I would rather burn my own flesh than spend 1 single day under your tyrannical, abusive control. The crowd erupted in a collective gasp. Arthur stared at the scar, trembling. You mutilated yourself to escape your birthright? My birthright? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. My birthright was a gilded cage designed by a megalomaniac who treats his children like racehorses. Look what you did to your own son, Arthur. He ran from you. He hid in Chicago just to get away from your expectations. And look what you did to Chloe. She's an idiot, yes, but you drove her to the brink of a nervous breakdown because you demand perfection instead of humanity. Arthur stepped forward, his trembling hand reaching out toward my face. You are a genius. The servers, the encryption. You bypassed my entire security mainframe. How old are you? 15. I said coldly, stepping back, refusing to let him touch me. My God, Arthur breathed, his eyes lighting up with a terrifying, obsessive fire. The anger was gone, replaced by absolute, reverent awe. He wasn't looking at a granddaughter. He was looking at his ultimate weapon. It's you. It's really you. The true Kensington intellect. You're magnificent. He turned to his security guards, pointing a shaking finger at Evelyn and Chloe. Call the police. I want them arrested for grand larceny, wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy. I want their bank accounts frozen immediately. Take them out of my sight. Evelyn began to scream. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of pure despair. No, Arthur, no. Abby, tell them I'm your mother. Security guards grabbed Evelyn by her arms, dragging her across the marble floor as she kicked and thrashed. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably, stumbling as a guard hauled her away by the back of her expensive dress. I watched them go without a single shred of pity. My mother had sold me for cash. Now she was going to pay the ultimate price. Arthur turned back to me, his chest heaving. He tried to compose himself, standing tall, trying to project the image of a benevolent patriarch. Abigail, he said, his voice dripping with honeyed promises. You have proven yourself beyond any doubt. You are my heir. The Kensington Empire is yours. I will give you the finest tutors, the greatest resources in the world. You will rule Wall Street by the time you are 20. He held out his hand. It was the offer of a lifetime. Hundreds of billions of dollars. Global power. Total domination. I looked at his outstretched hand. Then I looked up into his desperate, hungry eyes. You misunderstand, Arthur, I said, my voice ringing out clearly across the silent ballroom. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I tossed it onto the marble floor at his feet. It landed with a heavy, dismissive thud. I didn't come here to claim your empire, I said. I came to show you that I don't need it. Arthur looked down at the portfolio, confused. What is this? That is a summary of Ken's investments and right dynamics, I replied smoothly. A venture capital firm and a proprietary algorithmic trading suite. I built them from scratch. I am the sole proprietor. My current net worth, independent of your blood money, is roughly $400 million, and it's growing exponentially. The tech billionaires in the audience gasped. They knew those company names. They had been trying to figure out who the shadow CEO was for years. Arthur stared at me in horror, realizing the implications. You built that. With the help of my real parents, I said fiercely. Thomas and Sarah Wright. They adopted me. They gave me a home. They gave me love. And they let my mind flourish without holding a whip over my back. I buttoned my blouse and picked up my briefcase. You are old, Arthur, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. Your legacy is built on fear, and fear has an expiration date. Keep your money. Keep your empty penthouse. I'm going back to Chicago to eat pizza with my dad and write code with my mom. And if you ever try to contact me or lay claim to my work, I will buy a controlling stake in Kensington Enterprises and liquidate your life's work for spare parts. Arthur Kensington, the titan of industry, fell to his knees. He reached out toward me, a broken, defeated old man grasping at a ghost. Abigail, please, you are my blood. Blood is just biology, I said, turning my back on him. I am a Wright. The fallout was spectacular. A media firestorm that consumed the tabloids and financial networks for months. Evelyn Miller didn't just go to prison. She was buried under a mountain of federal charges. Arthur's lawyers ensured that the judge showed no mercy. She was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary for massive, multi-million-dollar fraud and extortion. The $50,000 a month she had collected for 8 years had to be paid back, leaving her utterly bankrupt. Chloe, being a minor, avoided prison, but her reality was perhaps worse. Stripped of her designer clothes, her private chefs, and her fabricated identity, she was thrust back into the public school system in a rundown neighborhood, living with a distant, resentful aunt. Without my intelligence to prop her up, she failed out entirely. The last I heard, the former billionaire heiress was working a drive-through window, still trying to tell anyone who would listen that she used to wear a diamond tiara. Arthur Kensington never recovered. The humiliation of being conned by a low-class grifter and an 8-year-old idiot shattered his reputation on Wall Street. The board of directors, sensing his weakness, forced him into early retirement. He lived out his final years entirely alone in his massive, silent penthouse, surrounded by Rothko paintings and the crushing weight of a legacy he had destroyed with his own hubris. As for me, I went home. The morning after the gala, I walked into the sunny, chaotic kitchen of the Wright household in Chicago. Thomas was burning pancakes on the stove, and Sarah was arguing with her laptop over a stubborn piece of code. When they saw me in the doorway, they dropped everything and rushed over, pulling me into a massive, warm hug. "How was the tech conference in New York, sweetie?" Sarah asked, kissing the top of my head. "It was highly productive," I smiled, leaning into their embrace, feeling the heavy, cold armor of the Kensington name finally melt away. The primary system crashed, but I think the rebuild will be much healthier. I had been reborn into a nightmare, but I had engineered my own salvation. I didn't need a stolen locket or a French lullaby to prove who I was. I was Abigail Wright, and I was exactly where I belonged. Wow, talk about the ultimate revenge. Abigail proved that true power isn't handed to you on a silver platter. It's built from the ground up. Evelyn and Chloe got exactly the brutal karma they deserved. And Arthur was left with nothing but his own empty pride. What was your favorite moment of Abigail's savage takedown? Would you have walked away from the billionaire empire like she did, or would you have taken the crown? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this story, make sure to hit that like button, share it, and subscribe for more.